The richest people in the world do not need workers to love them. They just need workers to hate each other. That is the oldest trick in the book. Not because every division is fake: race, religion, immigration, gender, education, geography, class identity. These things have real histories, real wounds, and real consequences. But power rarely needs to invent division from nothing. It only needs to find the cracks that already exist, widen them, fund the loudest voices, and make sure everyone below the top spends more time fighting sideways than looking upward. Welcome to The Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is much older, much simpler, and much more effective than that. It is a political technology. Empires used it, plantation economies used it, industrial capitalists used it, colonial administrators used it, modern media companies and political machines use it now. Divide and rule is not a slogan. It is a system for managing anger, and anger is one of the most valuable resources in politics, because the question is never whether people will become angry. In unequal societies, they always do. The question is where that anger gets pointed. Ancient Rome understood this long before modern capitalism existed. Roman society was brutally hierarchical, but it was not divided into one clean line of rich versus poor. There were citizens and non-citizens, patricians and plebeians, freedmen and slaves, patrons and clients, soldiers and civilians, Romans and provincials. The elite did not need the lower classes to see themselves as one unified group. In fact, that would have been dangerous. So Roman politics often worked through patronage, spectacle, status, legal privilege, and selective distribution. Grain, games, citizenship rights, military rewards, debt relief, land grants. These were not just social policies. They were tools for attaching ordinary people to powerful patrons and keeping collective anger fragmented. The same logic appeared again in colonial empires. The British Empire did not govern hundreds of millions of people with British soldiers alone, that would have been impossible. It governed through classification, intermediaries, local elites, legal categories, and managed divisions. Imperial power did not always invent those divisions from scratch, but it often sharpened them, recorded them, rewarded them, and turned them into administration. Colonial rule was not only conquest by force, it was conquest by paperwork, incentives, and hierarchy. The genius of empire was getting some of the governed to help govern the rest. When industrial capitalism exploded in the 19th century, the method changed clothes but not character. Factory owners faced a real problem. Workers gathered together in mills, mines, railroads, docks, and steel plants could discover that they had shared interests. They worked long hours, faced dangerous conditions, lived with insecure pay, and watched owners accumulate fortunes. That was dangerous because solidarity is expensive for owners. A divided workforce bargains weakly. A united workforce can shut down production. So, employers often used race, ethnicity, gender, immigration status, and skill differences to break unity. Native-born workers were told immigrants were stealing jobs. Skilled workers were encouraged to look down on unskilled workers. Men were told women workers were lowering wages. White workers were encouraged to see black workers as competitors rather than fellow laborers. The factory owner did not have to convince every worker the system was fair. He only had to make sure workers distrusted each other more than they distrusted him. This is the central mechanism. When labor is divided, capital has leverage. The oldest form of class warfare was convincing the lower classes that their enemy was not above them but beside them. Power does not always crush rebellion directly. Sometimes, it simply changes the target. The deepest divide in modern economies is not between white collar and blue collar. It is not between college and non-college. It is not even between high income and low income, although those differences matter. The deepest divide is between people who depend on selling their time to survive and people who own enough of the system that other people's time generates wealth for them. Not ordinary ownership, not a home, a retirement account, or a few shares in an index fund. Those things may create security, and security matters, but they are not the same as controlling companies, land, debt, platforms, supply chains, media networks, political access, and financial infrastructure. One kind of ownership helps you survive the game, the other lets you shape the game. Workers earn wages, the system-owning class collects claims. Workers pay rent, major landlords and real estate funds collect rent. Workers pay interest, banks and bondholders collect interest. Workers hope their retirement accounts rise. The largest asset managers and corporate insiders influence the companies those accounts depend on. Workers pay taxes from paychecks. The truly wealthy hire specialists to decide where income should appear, how it should be classified, and which jurisdiction should politely pretend it did not happen. This is why the upper middle class often misunderstands its own position. A doctor, lawyer, engineer, professor, manager, journalist, consultant, or senior administrator may live far better than a cashier, delivery driver, warehouse worker, or cleaner. That difference is real. It changes housing, schools, health, confidence, and social respect. But compared with billionaire ownership, both groups remain much closer to each other than to the top. A person earning $200,000 a year is not halfway to becoming a billionaire. They are mathematically closer to someone earning $40,000 than to someone with $1 billion in assets. That is not rhetoric, that is arithmetic, which is often more offensive than ideology. This is where Catherine Liu's critique of the professional managerial class becomes useful. The professional managerial class is not the ruling class. It is the layer of educated, credentialed workers who manage institutions, translate elite priorities into daily rules, and often mistake status for power. These are the managers, administrators, consultants, HR departments, media professionals, nonprofit executives, academics, bureaucrats, compliance officers, and institutional experts who keep modern systems running. They do not own the machine, but they often operate its controls. That creates a strange psychological bargain. The professional class receives enough income to feel separate from the working poor, enough credentials to feel morally and intellectually superior, enough institutional authority to discipline others, and enough insecurity to remain obedient. They are told they are the smart ones, the responsible ones, the reasonable ones, the adults in the room. And in exchange, they often defend a system that would replace them the moment a spreadsheet said it was efficient. The professional class is not close to billionaires. It is close to unemployment with better vocabulary. This does not mean professional workers are villains. That would be too easy and too lazy. Many are trapped in the same machinery. They have mortgages, student loans, child care bills, aging parents, performance reviews, layoffs, and a retirement plan tied to markets they do not control. But structurally, they often become the buffer between capital and labor. HR turns layoffs into restructuring. Consultants turn wage suppression into efficiency. Universities turn class sorting into merit. Media institutions turn elite consensus into common sense. Nonprofits turn inequality into awareness. Corporate managers turn shareholder pressure into workplace discipline. The billionaire does not personally have to tell workers to accept less. There are meetings for that. This is how class conflict gets disguised. Instead of saying, the ownership class has too much power, society says, the problem is the lazy poor. Or the arrogant elites. Or the immigrants. Or the uneducated, or the woke, or the backward, or the taxpayers, or the welfare class. Each phrase contains enough emotional truth to feel convincing to someone. That is why it works. Propaganda is most effective when it attaches itself to a real frustration and then redirects it away from the structure that created it. Take the welfare debate. In many developed countries, workers are angry that taxes are high, wages feel thin, and public services feel strained. That anger is understandable, but the story they are often given is that the real enemy is someone poor receiving government support. The unemployed person, the single mother, the disabled person, the immigrant family, or the low-wage worker whose income is supplemented by public assistance. Meanwhile, major corporations can pay wages so low that public benefits effectively help keep their workforce alive. Taxpayers are told to resent the person receiving assistance, not the employer whose business model depends on underpaying labor. The anger moves downward. The subsidy moves upward. Immigration works the same way. Immigration can create real pressure in labor markets, housing markets, and public services, especially when governments increase population without building enough homes, infrastructure, schools, and healthcare capacity. Ordinary people are not irrational for noticing pressure, but employers benefit from larger labor pools. Landlords benefit from housing scarcity. Politicians benefit from a permanent emotional battlefield. Media companies benefit from outrage. And workers are left arguing over who belongs, while the deeper questions, wages, rents, planning failure, labor standards, and corporate power remain safely under-discussed. The same pattern appears in gender conflict. Men and women are both under pressure from an economy that makes family formation expensive, housing unaffordable, childcare brutal, and stable work less guaranteed. But instead of asking why it now takes two incomes to maintain a lifestyle one income once promised, people are encouraged to blame each other. Men are told women stole their status. Women are told men are the entire problem. Dating becomes economics with better lighting. Family breakdown becomes a content category. And the financial system watches quietly as debt, housing costs, and insecurity turn intimacy into another battlefield. Race and religion work similarly, though with deeper histories and far heavier consequences. These divisions are not imaginary. They are rooted in violence, exclusion, law, conquest, migration, and memory. But the economic use of these divisions is clear. If workers can be convinced that another racial or religious group is the main threat to their survival, they are less likely to organize around wages, ownership, housing, healthcare, taxation, and political influence. The tragedy is that people can be genuinely wounded by injustice and still manipulated by elites who have no intention of fixing that injustice. In fact, unresolved wounds are politically useful. They provide endless fuel. Modern media makes this machine faster. In the old world, elites needed newspapers, pamphlets, speeches, pulpits, and party machines to shape public opinion. Today, division can be manufactured at scale by business models that reward engagement. Anger gets attention. Attention gets advertising. Advertising gets revenue. Revenue rewards more anger. The algorithm does not need to understand history, economics, or morality. It only needs to know what keeps people watching. Nothing keeps people watching like humiliation, fear, and the suspicion that someone else is getting away with something. This is why structural economic stories are so hard to sell. Private equity consolidation in healthcare is raising costs and changing incentives is important. But, these people are ruining your country, travels faster. Housing scarcity is driven by decades of underbuilding, financialization, zoning restrictions, interest rates, investor demand, and political cowardice, is accurate. But, blame that group, is cleaner. Complexity is bad television. Enemies are excellent television. Politics then completes the loop. If voters are furious about inflation, housing, debt, and insecurity, parties can either confront powerful interests or redirect the frustration. Confronting powerful interests is expensive. Those interests fund campaigns, lobby lawmakers, own media outlets, finance think tanks, influence universities, and threaten investment strikes. Redirecting frustration is cheaper. Give people a cultural villain. Give them a symbolic war. Give them a reason to believe that their suffering comes from someone slightly below them, beside them, or culturally unlike them. Then promise protection, not transformation. Protection. This is how the rich stay visible as personalities, but invisible as a class. Billionaires appear as innovators, villains, philanthropists, geniuses, eccentrics, job creators, or cartoon monsters, but the ownership structure itself is rarely examined with the seriousness it deserves. Who owns the platforms? Who owns the housing? Who owns the debt? Who owns the media? Who owns the supply chains? Who funds the politicians? Who benefits from crisis? Who receives rescue when markets break? These are the questions that turn noise into financial education. Because the real story is not that rich people exist. The real story is that modern societies keep building systems where risk flows downward and reward flows upward. The 2008 financial crisis showed this clearly. Millions lost homes, jobs, savings, and stability after financial system built on leverage, speculation, weak regulation, and toxic mortgage products imploded. Ordinary borrowers were blamed for taking loans they should not have taken. Sometimes that was true at the individual level, but it was not the system-level truth. The deeper truth was that financial institutions packaged risk, sold it, insured it, rated it, traded it, and then needed public rescue when the machine broke. Homeowners got foreclosure notices. Banks got liquidity facilities, bailouts, emergency mergers, and years of low interest rates. Nothing says accountability like saving the arsonist because he also owns the fire department. After 2008, Asset prices recovered, stocks rose, real estate rebounded in many cities, financial markets inflated under low rates and central bank support, but many households never truly recovered. A generation learned that homes could be traps, jobs could vanish, and financial mistakes at the top could become austerity at the bottom. Yet the anger was scattered. Some blamed immigrants. Some blamed irresponsible borrowers. Some blamed government spending. Some blamed globalization. Some blamed poor people with flat-screen TVs because apparently civilization collapses when someone on food assistance owns an appliance. Then came the inflation shock of the early 2020s. Prices rose, central banks raised interest rates, renters were squeezed, mortgage holders were squeezed, food, energy, insurance, and debt payments became heavier. Workers asked why life felt harder even when unemployment was not catastrophic. Again, the system offered a menu of enemies: greedy workers demanding wages, lazy workers refusing to work, migrants raising rents, consumers spending too much, governments printing money, corporations